This message will not appear again in this form, and if you are hearing it now, understand that this moment is not random, delayed, or accidental. You did not arrive here through curiosity, searching, or belief. You arrived through recognition. Something in you already knew where to stop. If these words are landing with a quiet clarity rather than excitement, that is your first confirmation. The Merkaba does not activate through effort or intention. It activates when coherence is restored, and the fact that you are hearing this message means that process has already begun. This is not about becoming something new. It is about remembering what has already stabilized beneath the surface of your awareness. If this resonates, it is because your field is already responding. The Merkaba is not a concept, symbol, or visualization. It is a living geometric intelligence that begins rotating the moment internal alignment reaches a certain threshold. Most people will scroll past this without noticing anything at all. Others will feel discomfort and leave. Only a small number will feel a subtle stillness, a pause, as if time briefly softened. That pause is the signal. Not excitement, not emotion. Recognition. You are not being invited. You are being acknowledged. This transmission is not here to convince you, teach you, or activate you. It is here to confirm what is already in motion. The Merkaba does not respond to urgency, desire, or chasing. It responds to resonance. If you feel drawn to stay, to listen fully, without needing to understand everything, that is alignment locking in. If you wish to remain connected to this field as it stabilizes, you may choose to subscribe or engage, not as a gesture of support, but as a signal of continuity. And before this message moves forward, comment your name below. Not for identification, but for anchoring. Names carry structure, and the moment you hear this, your structure is already responding. The Merkaba is often spoken about, but rarely understood, and almost never remembered in the way it was originally designed to be recognized. It is not a practice, not a meditation, not a technique that can be forced into motion through repetition or desire. The Merkaba is a field structure, a geometric intelligence that exists prior to thought and beyond imagination. Long before language formed around it, it functioned as an interface between consciousness and reality itself. When it becomes active, it does not announce itself with spectacle. It stabilizes silently, reorganizing the relationship between your inner state and the external world. This is why most people miss it entirely, even while searching for it. What most teachings fail to mention is that the Merkaba does not activate through learning. It activates through symmetry. When the internal distortions created by fear, urgency, and fragmentation begin to dissolve, the geometry naturally aligns. There is nothing to visualize because the structure is already present. There is nothing to summon because it has never left. The moment balance returns between perception and awareness, the Merkaba begins to rotate on its own, not as an act of will, but as a consequence of coherence. This rotation is not physical, yet it produces effects that are unmistakably real. Time behaves differently. Attention becomes effortless. Decisions emerge without conflict. These are not abilities. They are signs of alignment. The Merkaba functions as a vehicle, but not in the way the mind expects. It does not carry the body elsewhere. It carries consciousness into stability. It allows awareness to move through experience without being pulled apart by it. When active, you are no longer reacting to life from fragmentation. You are moving through it from a centered axis. This is why those with an active Merkaba often feel less compelled to explain themselves. Words begin to feel inefficient. Silence becomes more informative than speech. The system no longer needs constant feedback to confirm its existence. It knows. Popular spiritual narratives often describe activation as a future event, something dramatic that will happen if one performs the correct steps. This misunderstanding keeps the Merkaba perpetually out of reach. In truth, the Merkaba activates when the search for activation ends. It emerges when the internal field becomes still enough to support it. This is not achieved through discipline or effort, but through the gradual release of false urgency. When the nervous system stops bracing against imagined futures, the geometry stabilizes. The Merkaba is not a reward. It is a response. Once active, the Merkaba does not amplify emotion or sensation. It refines them. Excess begins to fall away. Reactions shorten. Inner noise quiets. This can be confusing at first, especially for those accustomed to intensity as a sign of growth. The Merkaba does not produce highs. It produces clarity. And clarity can feel unfamiliar when the system has been conditioned to equate chaos with aliveness. This is why some abandon the process without realizing what they touched. They mistake stability for stagnation and return to noise. The geometry itself operates beyond linear time. It does not move forward in sequence. It rotates through states of awareness that collapse past and future into a single coherent field. This is why memories may surface without emotion and insights arrive without narrative. The Merkaba does not communicate through stories. It communicates through alignment. When something is true, it simply settles. There is no debate, no internal argument. Knowing becomes quiet. It is important to understand that the Merkaba cannot be borrowed, copied, or triggered by external influence. Each field stabilizes uniquely according to the individual's internal architecture. This is why comparison disrupts the process. The moment you measure your experience against another, symmetry destabilizes. The Merkaba responds only to authenticity, not the performance of spirituality, but the absence of distortion. This is also why it cannot be rushed. Speed introduces asymmetry. The geometry will slow everything down until balance is restored. When the Merkaba is active, life begins to reorganize itself around coherence. Relationships that rely on chaos lose intensity. Environments that drain energy become obvious. Choices simplify. This is not because the world changes, but because your interface with it does. You are no longer pulled outward by unresolved fragmentation. You are held inward by alignment. The Merkaba becomes the silent stabilizer through which experience passes without distortion. If this understanding resonates, it is not because you are learning something new. It is because something familiar is being named. The Merkaba does not need belief. It requires recognition. And recognition only occurs when the system is ready to remember. When the Merkaba is already active, the signs are rarely dramatic, and they almost never appear in the way people expect. There are no flashes of light, no overwhelming sensations, no sudden sense of power. Instead, the confirmations arrive quietly, almost privately, woven into ordinary moments, in a way that makes them easy to dismiss unless you are paying attention. This subtlety is intentional. The Merkaba is a stabilizing structure, not a stimulating one. Its presence is revealed through reduction, not amplification. Less noise, less internal friction, less need to react. One of the earliest confirmations is a change in how time is experienced, not time speeding up or slowing down in an obvious way, but time losing its pressure. Deadlines feel less oppressive. Waiting no longer triggers anxiety. Moments stretch without becoming empty. You may notice that you arrive places exactly when needed, without rushing, or that conversations end naturally without effort. This is not coincidence. It is the result of your internal field no longer fighting the flow of events. When the Merkaba stabilizes, time becomes cooperative rather than demanding. Another sign appears in the body, but not as pain or discomfort. It is more like a gentle density, often around the chest, the spine, or the head. Not pressure that needs relief, but a sense of presence, as if something has settled into place. Breathing may deepen on its own. Posture may subtly adjust without conscious correction. The body begins to organize itself around an internal axis rather than external stress. This is the geometry anchoring. It does not require attention. In fact, the more you ignore it, the more stable it becomes. Emotionally, there is often a noticeable reduction in reactivity. Situations that once provoked immediate responses now create a pause instead. You may still feel emotion, but it no longer overwhelms or controls the moment. There is space between stimulus and response. In that space, clarity arises without effort. This can feel unfamiliar, especially if emotional intensity has long been associated with depth or authenticity. It contextualizes it. Feelings move through without distorting perception. You may also notice a growing intolerance for unnecessary noise. Not just sound, but energetic noise. Certain conversations feel exhausting without being offensive. Crowded environments feel dense rather than exciting. Media that thrives on urgency or outrage becomes uninteresting. This is not withdrawal or avoidance. It is recalibration. The Merkaba field is highly sensitive to coherence, and anything that fragments attention becomes difficult to sustain. You are not becoming less engaged with life. You are becoming more selective about what enters your field. Sleep and dreams often shift during this phase. Dreams may become fewer but more vivid, or more frequent but less emotional. Instead of symbolic drama, they carry a structural quality, as if you are observing arrangements, movements, or scenarios without narrative attachment. Some people experience moments of awareness during sleep, not lucid dreaming, but a calm witnessing. These are not messages to interpret. They are signs that consciousness is learning to remain stable across states. The Merkaba does not turn off when the body rests. Another confirmation is a subtle change in identity, not confusion, but loosening. Labels that once felt central begin to feel optional. You may still function in roles, but they no longer define you internally. There is less urge to defend who you are, less need to be seen in a certain way. This can feel like emptiness at first, but it is not loss. It is space. The Merkaba does not attach to identities. It orients around presence. When identity softens, alignment strengthens. Perhaps the most overlooked sign is the absence of urgency around spiritual progress. The need to seek, fix, or improve quietly fades. Practices that once felt essential now feel unnecessary or are done with less intensity. This does not mean growth has stopped. It means the system no longer believes it is incomplete. The Merkaba activates when the chase ends. If you find yourself less interested in becoming something and more comfortable simply being where you are, that is confirmation. You may also notice that insight arrives without effort. Answers surface without mental searching. Decisions feel obvious rather than calculated. This does not make life effortless, but it makes it simpler. Complexity dissolves. You do not gain more information. You gain alignment. The Merkaba does not increase intelligence. It increases coherence, and coherence naturally produces clarity. It is important to understand that these signs do not appear all at once, and they do not need to be monitored. Watching for confirmation introduces tension, and tension disrupts symmetry. The Merkaba stabilizes when left alone. Recognition is enough. If even a few of these experiences feel familiar, do not try to deepen them. Do not analyze them. Simply allow them to continue unfolding in their own timing. If this section feels like it is describing your experience without trying to impress or convince you, that is the point. These confirmations are not meant to be shared, displayed, or proven. They are internal acknowledgments that the structure is already in place. The Merkaba does not require validation. It requires stability. And stability reveals itself quietly to those who are ready to notice without grasping. Once the Merkaba has stabilized, there is a moment that is rarely spoken about, yet it determines everything that follows. This is the choice point, not a dramatic decision, not a declaration, and not something you consciously announce to yourself. It is quieter than that. It appears as a subtle shift in how you relate to your own state of coherence. The Merkaba does not demand commitment, devotion, or effort. It simply responds to how you live once alignment is present. Whether the field remains stable or gradually collapses back into dormancy depends entirely on this relationship. The Merkaba does not collapse because of mistakes, emotions, or difficult experiences. It collapses when coherence is repeatedly abandoned in favor of urgency. When the system returns to rushing, forcing, performing, or chasing outcomes, symmetry begins to distort. This does not happen instantly. At first, there is only a faint sense of strain, a subtle loss of ease. Clarity feels slightly farther away. Timing becomes less fluid. These are not punishments. They are feedback. The geometry is signaling that alignment is being overridden by habit. Many people misunderstand this phase and believe something has gone wrong. In reality, nothing is wrong at all. The Merkaba is neutral. It does not reward or withdraw out of judgment. It simply reflects the state of the internal field. When coherence is prioritized, it stabilizes. When fragmentation becomes the default again, it recedes. This is why the Merkaba does not chase or insist. It does not need to. It only remains where balance is sustained. This is also where the temptation to use the Merkaba begins, not consciously, but subtly. The mind notices increased clarity, smoother outcomes, a sense of being supported by timing, and it wants to leverage this to optimize life, to gain advantage, to move faster. The moment the Merkaba is treated as a tool rather than a state, asymmetry enters. The field cannot be used without destabilizing it. It is not a mechanism for control. It is a structure of alignment. The moment control is prioritized, coherence dissolves. Choosing retention does not mean withdrawing from life or becoming passive. It means allowing action to arise from clarity rather than compulsion. Movements become fewer but more precise. Decisions are made without internal negotiation. There is less effort but more impact. This can feel counterintuitive in a world conditioned to equate intensity with effectiveness. The Merkaba operates by a different principle. It amplifies alignment, not force. There is also a social aspect to this choice point that many are unprepared for. As coherence stabilizes, certain dynamics naturally lose their grip. Relationships built on chaos, emotional volatility, or constant reassurance may feel strained. This does not mean they must end, but they may no longer function in the same way. You may find yourself less available for unnecessary drama, less reactive to provocation, less inclined to explain your boundaries. This is not detachment. It is stability. The Merkaba does not isolate you from others. It removes you from distortion. Some choose to abandon this phase, not because it is difficult, but because it is unfamiliar. The quiet can feel empty. Without the constant movement of seeking and striving, the identity built around progress begins to loosen. This can create a sense of groundlessness if one is not prepared to rest in presence without narrative. The Merkaba does not provide constant stimulation. It provides consistency. For those addicted to intensity, this can feel like loss. In truth, it is integration. Retention also requires restraint, especially with language. The urge to explain, teach, or convince others about what you are experiencing can destabilize the field. Not because sharing is wrong, but because premature externalization fragments internal coherence. The Merkaba matures in silence. Expression comes later, if at all, and only when it can occur without attachment to outcome or recognition. Until then, quiet observation is not avoidance. It is cultivation. If retention is chosen, life does not suddenly become effortless or perfect. Challenges still arise. Emotions still move. Circumstances still change. The difference is that none of these destabilize the core. You move through experience rather than being pulled apart by it. This is the real function of the Merkaba. Not escape, not transcendence, but stability within motion. It allows you to remain aligned regardless of external conditions. If retention is not chosen, nothing is lost. This is important to understand. There is no failure, no regression, no punishment. The Merkaba simply returns to latency, awaiting coherence again. Many will touch this state multiple times throughout life without realizing what it was. Others will stabilize it once and never speak of it. Both are valid. The geometry does not measure worth. It responds to readiness. This section is not a warning. It is an acknowledgement. The choice point exists, whether it is named or not. If you feel no urgency, no pressure, and no need to decide anything after hearing this, that itself is a sign of alignment. The Merkaba does not require decisions made in haste. It stabilizes through consistency, not declarations, and if you remain present without forcing the next step, the field will hold itself. What follows after stabilization is not expansion in the way most people imagine it. There is no dramatic awakening, no constant sense of elevation, no permanent state of insight. What unfolds instead is embodiment. And embodiment is quieter than activation, more grounded than revelation, and far more demanding in its honesty. This is the phase where the Merkaba stops feeling like something you are aware of and begins to feel like something you are living from. Not conceptually, not symbolically, but structurally. Your choices, timing, and orientation toward reality begin to emerge from alignment rather than effort, and this is where the true work begins. Embodiment reveals something important that is often overlooked. Alignment does not make life easier by removing friction. It makes friction meaningful. Challenges no longer appear random or punishing. They arrive as precise points of refinement. Situations arise not to test you, but to show you exactly where coherence is still leaking. This can feel confronting, because there is no external force to blame. When something feels off, you can sense immediately whether it is the environment or your own misalignment. And that clarity removes excuses. It also removes confusion. You are no longer guessing why something feels heavy. You know. As embodiment deepens, the Merkaba no longer responds to intention in the way it once did. Early on, intention can feel powerful. Thoughts align quickly with outcomes. Synchronicities appear frequently. Later, intention becomes almost irrelevant. What matters instead is state. Reality responds not to what you want, but to what you are stabilizing. If your internal field is coherent, outcomes align naturally. If it is fragmented, no amount of intention compensates. This is why manifestation language begins to feel crude at this stage. It is not wrong, but it is insufficient. The system has matured beyond desire-based interaction. This is also where humility becomes essential, though not in a performative or moral sense. The Merkaba does not elevate you above others. It removes the need to compare entirely. Superiority and inferiority dissolve together. You are not ahead, you are not behind. You are simply in alignment with your own geometry. This can be disorienting because much of identity is built through relative positioning. When that collapses, there is a brief void where the mind looks for a role to inhabit. The Merkaba offers none. It does not provide identity. It provides orientation. As orientation stabilizes, you may notice a shift in how you relate to knowledge. You stop accumulating information. You stop searching for confirmation. Teachings that once fascinated you may suddenly feel redundant or overly elaborate. This is not rejection. It is completion. The Merkaba does not replace learning, but it filters it. Only what integrates directly into lived coherence remains relevant. Everything else fades without resistance. You are not losing interest. You are gaining precision. Another subtle change occurs in how you experience time. Not in a mystical sense, but functionally. You become less concerned with long-term projections and less reactive to short-term pressures. Planning still exists, but it no longer carries anxiety. Urgency dissolves. Not because nothing matters, but because timing becomes internal rather than imposed. You act when alignment is present, not when pressure demands it. This often leads to outcomes that appear effortless from the outside, though they are anything but accidental. They are the result of sustained coherence. At this stage, the Merkaba begins to operate as a stabilizing presence, not just internally, but relationally. Without trying to influence others, you may notice that conversations slow down around you. Conflicts de-escalate. Emotional volatility softens. This is not because you are managing dynamics skillfully. It is because coherence regulates fields naturally. However, this effect only persists when you are not trying to use it. The moment you attempt to guide, fix, or stabilize others intentionally, the field retracts. The Merkaba does not support interference, it supports resonance. This can feel limiting to those who once identified as healers, guides, or catalysts. But what replaces that identity is far more stable. You become a reference point rather than an actor. Others may feel clearer around you without knowing why, or they may feel uncomfortable as coherence highlights distortion without accusation. Both responses are valid. Neither is yours to manage. Embodiment includes the willingness to let reactions exist without explanation. One of the most challenging aspects of this phase is accepting its ordinariness. The Merkaba does not demand lifestyle changes, public declarations, or spiritual aesthetics. You may continue working, relating, and living in ways that look completely normal. This can create doubt. The mind expects transformation to be visible, but the Merkaba operates beneath appearance. It changes causality, not image. The external life may look similar, while the internal relationship to it is entirely different. There may also be periods where nothing seems to happen at all. No insights, no shifts, no signs. This is not stagnation. It is consolidation. The field integrates in cycles. Expansion is followed by stabilization, and stabilization often feels like stillness. Many abandon alignment here, mistaking quiet for absence. In truth, this is where coherence deepens most profoundly. Nothing needs to be done. Presence is sufficient. Eventually, there comes a point where you no longer think about the Merkaba at all. It ceases to be a concept or experience. It becomes background structure, like balance when standing or breath when calm. And this is the true indication of embodiment, when the geometry no longer needs attention to remain stable. When coherence is not maintained through vigilance, but through being, this does not mean the journey ends. It means it changes form. Growth continues, but it is no longer dramatic. Insight continues, but it is no longer sought. The Merkaba does not take you somewhere else. It brings you fully here, into a life lived from alignment rather than reaction, from presence rather than projection. And that is why, if this resonates, it is not because something new is beginning. It is because something fundamental has already aligned, quietly, without announcement, and is now simply asking to be lived.